it with other friends and colleagues to Ukraine and donated it to the brave soldiers of Ukraine. So my support and reform support for Ukraine has been rock solid, Prime Minister, throughout. And it is important that this House is united, which it is, Madam Deputy Speaker. And last week, when the 28-point plan emerged, we rejected it immediately. Just yesterday, Prime Minister, I was with a Ukrainian delegation, and we were talking specifically about the leverage that the European nations has with regard to the frozen assets, the majority of which, of course, are here in Europe. So would I urge the Prime Minister, amongst all of the noise, to utilise that leverage, because that, I think, is one of the most powerful negotiating points that the West has against the vile dictator Putin.
Well, Mr. Speaker, he could have stood up and said that Reform's seen sense and decided they will have an investigation in relation to what happened in this bribery case. And I don't doubt that he drove and personally committed in relation to support. But the simple fact is this: you can't be pro-Putin and pro-Ukraine. You have to decide between the two, and Reform is pro-Putin, and that is why they undermine. Well, they've just been convicted, a 10-year sentence for bribe, for what? Taking pro-Russian bribes. It couldn't be clearer than that, and an unwillingness to say we need to investigate how on earth that happened. Can he not see the inconsistency in what he's saying?
Rachel Maskell, and then I'll be calling Steve Darling.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is feared that the brutality in El Fasher will only intensify and also spread to Tooele and beyond if international action isn't convened and focused on the resolutions that are needed, not least to stop the incursions with drones supplied via the UAE and mercenaries as well. Could the Prime Minister say more about what happened in South Africa to put that focus which is necessary, and what the next steps are to stop the expansion of the atrocities we're witnessing in Sudan?
Can I thank you for raising Sudan, because what was an appalling situation is even more appalling over recent days and weeks. And we discussed it pretty extensively in the G20 and support the work that the Quad is doing in relation to this. And that is aimed predominantly at a ceasefire and the provision of humanitarian aid. This is the worst humanitarian situation in the world, and bringing about a better resolution. Madam Deputy Speaker, can I just do my best to update the House in relation to the news? As I understand it, and this is coming to me secondhand, so I'm not, if this turns out to be not entirely accurate, I hope the House will forgive me. I'll come back and correct the record. But my understanding is this is not a new agreement. It is Ukraine confirming they're happy with the draft that emerged in Geneva yesterday, which of course doesn't cover the question of territory. So my best understanding is this is a confirmation of basically what came out of Geneva, that it isn't a new set of proposals or agreements in any way. So I think that's what it is. If I get more information, I'll update the House and we can discuss it in due course.
Steve Darling.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Prime Minister talks of having extensive discussions about limiting the export of oil and gas from Russia. This is the engine that is driving the machine of the war effort from Russia. The Danish waters could offer the key to killing the shadow fleet. With an international convention regulating the shipping going through those straits, that would stop the shadow fleet and stop a significant part of this shadow fleet activity supporting Russia. It would also drive environmental support for this area with the stronger regulations with this convention. What consideration has the Prime Minister and his colleagues given to this?
Can I thank you for raising this, because how we deal with the shadow fleet is something we discuss regularly, and Danish authorities can do a lot and do a lot in their waters, as do Norway and other countries. in the region, and we are looking at what further we could do in relation to the shadow fleet, because his underlying point is hugely important, which is the oil and gas are fuelling Russia's aggression here, and that's why we need to ensure that oil and gas is taken off the market. That can only happen if we deal, amongst other things, with the shadow fleet.
Graham Downey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Prime Minister for his continued support of Ukraine. Can I, furthermore, going back to the announcement at the G20 regarding the £4 billion deal with Indonesia, can I thank the Prime Minister for his efforts in securing that maritime partnership programme for Babcock, which will benefit people in my constituency, securing hundreds of jobs. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that that is testament to the skills and experience of the workforce at Rosyth, and will he continue to do everything that he can to support shipbuilding in Scotland and at Rosyth in particular?
Well, this is such an important point, because winning these deals, whether it's the Indonesia deal that we finally finished concluding whilst we're at the G20, or the Norway frigate deal as well, it is only possible for us as a country to conclude those deals where we have to compete against others in the world. The frigate deal was against France, Germany and the United States because of the quality of the workforce, their professionalism and commitment to delivering on time. And that is why, after the Norway frigate deal, I went up to the Clyde to see the workforce, to say thank you to them for putting me in a position where we could secure that deal. And I'd be grateful if he passes that on to his constituents.
Sir Alex Shelbrooke.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, signals matter. Right now, Putin thinks he's getting his own way. So, regarding even the answers the Prime Minister has given about the G7, can I just ask the Prime Minister, as a point of principle, would he sit around a table if the indicted war criminal Putin was sat at it?
No, I wouldn't. And I took my first opportunity at the United Nations Security Council when I was there last year, my first opportunity as Prime Minister, be very, very clear as to where I stand in relation to, in that case, the Security Council, but the principle applies elsewhere. You cannot be or subscribe to international law and the UN Charter if you're in breach of it by this illegal war.
Patricia Ferguson.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank my right honourable friend for the work he is doing to secure peace in Ukraine, and I also thank him for his very good comments about BAE Systems, which is partially located in my constituency of Glasgow West. Point 24 of the Trump plan indicates that one of the things that should happen as part of that plan is that all civilian detainees and hostages will be returned, including children. The kidnapping of children is such a heinous thing to do, and a war crime in and of itself, that surely, as a mark of good faith, Putin shouldn't wait for any agreement on this plan or other plans, but should release those children immediately. And in saying that, I pay tribute to my honourable friend, the member for Paisley and Renfrew South, for the work she has done over many months on this issue. But would he also agree with me that point 26 of that plan, which says that all parties involved in this conflict will receive full amnesty for their actions during the war and agree not to make any claims or consider any complaints in the future, cannot be tolerated?
Well, can I agree with her on both fronts? Of course, these children should be released straight away. They should never have been taken in the first place, and it's heartbreaking as well as intolerable that they're held for a moment longer. And as for amnesty, no, I do not agree with amnesty for Putin and others for their illegal acts.
Dr Ellie Chowns.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm deeply concerned that it appears that American negotiators have been listening more to the unreasonable demands of the Russian aggressors rather than to the security needs of the Ukrainians. Can the Prime Minister assure me that in his conversations with President Trump, he has made absolutely clear that the voices of Ukrainians have to be front and centre in securing any just and lasting peace?
I can assure her that in all my discussions, the principles I set out to the House, that matters on the future of Ukraine must be for Ukraine, have been the guiding principles in everything that we've done.
Olivia Blake.
Speaker, and I thank the Prime Minister for his statement and actions. if we do achieve peace, which we're all hoping we do, the efforts to rebuild Ukraine cannot just be about infrastructure. They have to also be focused on rebuilding people's lives, from those who have been devastatingly injured, those who've lost loved ones, and civil society, which has been really tested. What will the UK government do to make sure that there is the funding and support in place to allow not only the rebuilding of buildings, but the rebuilding of civil society?
I thank her for her question. She's right, it won't be just about rebuilding infrastructure. It will be about the rebuilding of society. And that's why I was really pleased last year to sign the 100-year agreement we had with Ukraine, which was intended to and does show that this isn't an agreement just for the duration of the conflict, but is something that goes well beyond the conflict to the lasting relationship that I hope we will have between our two countries.
David Mundell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I was very pleased that the Prime Minister also mentioned Sudan, and we can't be blind to Russia's malign interest there or indeed across the Sahel. But can I ask him specifically what discussions he had with Prime Minister Modi about his approach both to Russian oil, but also to what appear to be his overly friendly social media posts towards President Putin?
Well, I won't disclose all the details of my discussions, but he can rest assured that the principles that I've set out to the House guide me in all of those discussions.
Rupert Hook.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Prime Minister for his statement and updating us all while this is obviously a fast-moving situation. Last week at the OSCE, we harrowingly heard from our Ukrainian counterparts how 20,000 children have been abducted by Russia since this war began. So can I ask him again to reiterate that in the just and lasting peace that we all seek, that they are at the centre of all this, and to send a clear and immediate message, as Pink Floyd might have put it, hey, Putin, leave those kids alone.
Well, I agree with the principle she puts forward. I'm not sure I'll put it quite in the terms she does, but I think the sentiment is one that's shared. But I mean, you know, this is just shocking. The idea of kidnapping children as an act of war and a weapon of war is just so disgusting, frankly, that we should do absolutely everything we can, not only to ensure that the children are safe and secure in return, but also there's full accountability.
Matt Pritchard.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I thank the Prime Minister for his statement? But if I may, just sort of, Madam Deputy Speaker, caution the Prime Minister. I understand that the reports that were referred to by the Honourable Member for Leeds North West are a single source US official, unnamed, and I just think that we might be falling into a trap here that others want us to fall into, and that is bouncing the Ukrainians ahead of an arbitrary deadline of Thanksgiving Day. So I think we need to ensure that officials and all of us are able to verify sources and corroborate, even if they are reported in the mainstream media and repeated in the United Kingdom. So therefore, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm still allowed, I believe, to ask the question, what reassurance can the Prime Minister give the people of this country, and indeed Ukraine, that President Trump's very bad 28-point plan is not now replaced by a bad 19-point plan, because we all know from history that both Ukraine, Europe, the United Kingdom, and even our allies, the United States, will rue the day that we roll over for Putin. Because if we reward the aggressor, we know that history tells us they come back for more.
Well, can I thank him? And my instinct is with him on the breaking news. I spoke to President Zelensky about 4 hours ago, and I've obviously spoken to him extensively, so I've got a pretty good sense of where he's at on this. I'm intending to speak to him again this afternoon, but I think... I'm sorry? Well, my instinct is that this probably isn't anything of greater significance than what was coming out of yesterday. If it is, of course, I'll make another statement. But I spoke to him this morning and got a very clear sense of where he's at. I'm intending to speak to him again this afternoon. We've got the coalition of willing. If there is anything, I will, of course, update the House. But he's right to caution the underlying point he makes, which is that we must hold to the principle that matters about the future of Ukraine are for Ukraine, and that means we must be engaging as extensively as we are with the President and the Ukrainians to make sure that every step of the way we are taking into account in a practical sense that matters for Ukraine must be for Ukraine. That can only happen if we're talking to them in the way that we are.
Peter Swallow.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I refer members to my register of interest and thank the Prime Minister for the leadership he has shown on Ukraine. Madam Deputy Speaker, Year 6 students from St Margaret Clitheroe School in Bracknell have written to me to express their deep concern about the ongoing crisis we're seeing in Sudan. So can I thank the Prime Minister for his leadership at the G20 on this conflict and ask him what message he has for St Margaret Clitheroe students who are concerned about this deep tragedy.
Well, can he please pass the message back to them to say thank you for raising this. It is important that they've done so, and the fact that they raised it with him means it's been now raised through him on the floor of this House, so they're directly inputting into our democracy and accountability, and assure them that we are working with partners to bring about an end to the appalling situation in Sudan, the biggest humanitarian crisis in the world, and not just of recent days and weeks, but for a very long time, just simply worse and more intense, and that if we could reassure them we're doing everything we can with partners to bring an end to this awful situation, and thank them for their input.
Claire Young.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Prime Minister referred to Putin's barbaric attacks on civilian energy infrastructure. What discussions has he had with his G20 counterparts about learning from Ukraine's experience to protect energy supplies and infrastructure from Russian hostile action?
Well, firstly, thank her for raising this, because the attacks on the energy supplies are intended to inflict damage on civilians in Ukraine, as it does on a regular basis, particularly as we go into the winter. We're doing two things. We're working with the Ukrainians on what more support we can give to them to safeguard their energy supplies, but of course with allies we're looking at where there are any issues that we need to address in relation to any vulnerabilities that we may have.
Laura Kirk-Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Prime Minister for his updates on the G20 and in particular for his commitment to the Global Fund, which I think we should be really proud of. I was also very pleased to see Sudan referenced in the joint declaration of the G20 leaders. As the Prime Minister has said, it's the world's worst humanitarian crisis, but we're also seeing appalling accounts of war crimes. So can I ask what more the Prime Minister will now do with global partners to secure a ceasefire, protect civilians and hold the warring parties to account for their crimes?
Well, can I thank her for a question? In particular, the Global Fund is so important. She heard the statistics that I went through. In relation to the wider situation, the focus is very much on a cessation of hostilities and humanitarian support, which is desperately needed.
Sir Bernard Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does the Prime Minister agree with many assessments that make clear that Russia is actually in a far weaker position than President Putin pretends, so long as we continue to support the war effort in Ukraine? But that also depends upon us developing more independent, non-American capability, and the best way to do that is to fund the Ukrainians to develop their own capabilities so that they can continue to defend their own country.
Well, can I thank him for that, because it is important that we make clear that Russia is in a much weaker position than they pretend, and we should always remember that the early briefings and intelligence in relation to this conflict were that Russia would achieve its end in a matter of a few weeks at the very beginning of the war. Here we are nearly 4 years in, and because of the fearless defence of the Ukrainians, supported by others, that hasn't been the case. Secondly, in relation to the damage to their economy that sanctions and other financial issues are having, that has done real damage if you look at the inflation rate and the impact on their economy. But his central point is really important, because the plans of the coalition of the willing are premised on Ukraine having the capability that it needs, around which the plans that we've put in place would operate, not as a substitute or as an alternative, but actually based on Ukraine having the ability and capability within Ukraine to do what it needs to do to safeguard and self-protect.
Catherine Atkinson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Trains, planes and submarines. The Prime Minister put the pride of Derby manufacturing front and centre of his G20. Millions saw him on a train made in Derby, halfway around the world in Johannesburg, showing the world what our city is famous for. Will he tell us more about what the deals he secured means for my constituents who work at Rolls-Royce and in the rail sector? And will he continue his focus on winning international deals for more high productivity, high skills, high wage jobs?
That she's an incredible champion for Derby, and it was really incredible to be in Johannesburg, sitting in a train that had been made in Derby. And it is very significant that countries around the world want to do deals with the United Kingdom because of the quality of our workforce, the professionalism and commitment of all those that work in Derby in her particular case, but in other workforces across the country. Those particular trains are going to be used for the run to the airport and back, and so they're going to be relied on very, very heavily in South Africa. But the idea, I was very proud that other countries are saying it's the UK we now want to do deals with, as she says, whether that's in relation to frigates, whether it's in relation to submarines or trains. And she should be very proud of the workforce in Derby, and if she could pass on my thanks to them for allowing us to do this work, I'd be very grateful.
Anne Davies.
Madam Llefarydd, and thank you, Prime Minister, for your statement. It's reported in the draft deal notes that it is expected Russia will not invade its neighbours. It's not expected is wholly inadequate when we cannot place our trust in the words of leaders such as Vladimir Putin. What steps is the Prime Minister taking to ensure that this agreement includes clear, enforceable safeguards, and what measures are being implemented to strengthen UK's resilience against Russian interference?
Can I thank her? Look, in relation to the security guarantees, the planning has taken place at the Coalition of the Willing. That needs to be put together with the US guarantee to make sure that it's not an expectation that Putin doesn't invade Ukraine again. It's an absolutely clear message that if he does again, there will be consequences, because it's only if that is in place with strong guarantees and credibility that we will be able to deter Putin, because without them, as we've seen from the past, he simply will breach any agreement that's reached in due course in the future. In relation to interference in our democracy, we need to bear down on Russian interference in our democracy, and we'll continue to do so.
Arkeel Crichton.
Madam Deputy Speaker, my friend, the Scottish journalist Jen Stout, has just returned from the grey zone between Russian and Ukrainian forces, where to try and evacuate the wounded or even wander outside for a moment is to invite death from the sky by drones. The message she brings back from Ukrainians on the front line is that they will not give up this territory that they have defended for years. And will the Prime Minister ensure that the message that comes from here, apart from the Lord Haw-Haws paid by Putin, is that their front line is our front line, and that Ukrainian sovereignty must be respected, and that we will stand with Ukraine?
Can I thank him? And he's absolutely right. The change in the use of drone warfare over the course of the last 3 to 4 years has been very accelerated, very intense, to the point now, as he really reflects, that if you're seen, you're dead. And that is the effect of drone warfare, and everybody on the front line absolutely understands that. Tens of thousands have been lives have been lost defending particular lines, in Donetsk in particular. And I will never forget visiting a hospital in Kyiv where I met those that had been burnt very badly on the front line and were receiving treatment in those hospitals, which was a very poignant reminder of the impact this is having on Ukrainians, and it is no wonder that they're not going to give that up after so much sacrifice.
Sir Desmond Swain.
What indication was there that Putin would accept even the earlier iteration of this agreement?
Very good question.
Well, I'm not able to say, because I've not been involved in any discussions with Putin, as he would have expected. But I mean, the main thing is to be clear that the draft was not acceptable in a number of respects, but did have essential elements which are going to be required, which is why the work is being done to ensure that we get to a place that is acceptable to Ukraine and then can be used as a basis, I hope, of some sort of negotiated outcome.
John Slinger.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I strongly welcome the Prime Minister's emphasis on a just and lasting peace. Does he agree that while it is noble to want the fighting to stop, in any conflict this can always be achieved by giving in to the aggressor's demands? And history shows that this is not peace, it is appeasement. Does he further agree that Ukraine must not be forced to give up its territory and long-term security needs, not only for their defence, but because this would weaken the very principles of sovereignty and the rules-based system, endangering us all?
Can I agree with the principles he set out and assure him that I'll make the point at the meeting of the coalition this afternoon that I always make when we meet, which is whilst we are working for peace and trying to put in place security guarantees, we must not let up on keeping Ukraine in the fight now. It is a big mistake, and I do worry that because of the hope of peace, it is always possible that the focus goes off the fact that Ukraine needs support now to stay in the fight, and we must never lose that focus.
Robin Swan.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Prime Minister's statement says that Putin continues to seek to undermine our security. So when a deal is done to the satisfaction of Ukraine, can the Prime Minister give this House an assurance that the defence and the preparations for our security against Putin, because he won't give up, will continue in regards to the work that we continue to do?
I can give him that reassurance, but I'll give him the reassurance that we won't wait until there's some agreement in place to ensure that. We're taking those measures now.
Jim Dixon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and on behalf of my constituents, can I congratulate the Prime Minister in demonstrating UK leadership by supporting the Ukrainian government and President Zelensky to turn the 28-point peace plan, which very much appears to have been authored by Russia, into a much more acceptable 19-point peace plan, which clearly needs to be built on. Does the Prime Minister agree with me, and again the majority of my constituents who contact me, that it's vital the UK and Europe remain absolutely steadfast in their support for Ukraine to achieve a lasting and just peace?
Well, I do agree with him and his constituents, and we're doing everything we can to ensure that. It is remarkable that through the coalition of willing, which is mainly European countries, but not just European countries, Japan and Canada and Australia were centrally involved in our discussions over the weekend, there's been such a singular purpose in supporting Ukraine.
Ben Oxyjector.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I appreciate that this statement might be being outpaced by events outside of this chamber. But negotiating this peace deal with Russia seems to be at odds with nearly 4 years of steadfast military support. The overriding message is that the rules-based order means nothing, that we'll acquiesce to countries that breach sovereign borders, and actions no longer have consequences. The Prime Minister may as well be waving a piece of paper at Heston Aerodrome. The message this sends to our adversaries, and specifically the message it sends to China, is that the West will be too weak to take action if China invades Taiwan. He mentioned earlier that Russia will face consequences if it invades again. So when he says a just and lasting peace, what consequences will Russia face for their current actions, or can they act with impunity?
We had a pretty good tone up until now, but I'm not here waving some piece of paper. I'm working with Ukraine to try and bring about a just and lasting peace for them, and with other countries. We all want a just and lasting peace. It's not just going to happen if we don't have negotiations. So we have to have those negotiations with clear principles about accountability and with very, very strong security guarantees. But he's really not doing this House a service to undermine a really serious effort by international partners to bring about a just and lasting peace. It's very easy to speak in this House. It's much harder in practice to negotiate an end to a conflict on just grounds. We will do so, as we've done so from beginning to end, as the last government did, in all fairness, by being clear that we are the closest ally of Ukraine, the most supportive country, and I'm very proud that that's the approach we've taken in this House.
Jonathan Brash.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Prime Minister rightly said in his statement that Putin continues to seek to undermine our security. Efforts that were aided and abetted by Reform's Nathan Gill when he took Russian bribes. He is a traitor to this country. Can I ask the Prime Minister how plausible he thinks it is that that would be an isolated incident? And does he think that Reform's refusal to investigate their own party and find out how many more Putin puppets and traitors lurk there tells its own story?
The way I would put it is this: if the leadership of Reform were confident that there are no other pro-Russia activities and links in their party, they would surely want to have the investigation. The very fact that they won't look at this tells me that they're not confident of that and they don't want any of us to know about it.
Deputy Speaker, will the Prime Minister reassure my constituents in Yeovil that he will oppose any peace deal that rewards Russia for its aggression, whether that is carving up Ukraine's territory or allowing Russia to join the G7, because if Putin gets what he wants, this will never end?
Well, I can reassure his constituents that we'll absolutely fight for a just outcome and a lasting outcome, and he can tell his constituents that we're working very, very closely with the Ukrainians on this, as we've always done, supporting Ukraine for as long as they may need.
Chris Spence.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Prime Minister for his statement today and his continued leadership on a global scale, particularly in terms of Ukraine. Can I also welcome his statement with regards to the investment this government is going to put into the Global Health Fund? And I absolutely recognise the importance of tackling HIV, tackling malaria and tackling TB. But can I put a personal plea in for my Harlow constituency, Anne Strike, a Paralympian and a polio victim, to continue to lead on the world stage in the eradication of polio? We are so close, but global conflicts like Ukraine obviously meaning that we're seeing more incidents of polio in future.
He's a proud champion for Harlow, and I'm very pleased that he's raised polio in that context and linked it to his constituency, because we mustn't lose sight of the devastating impact of polio, of HIV, of AIDS and TB, and they're having a devastating effect across the globe, and they are a threat to us as well if we don't act.
Dr Danny Chambers.
Deputy Speaker, I thank the Prime Minister for his reaffirming his commitment to the Global Fund. I actually secured a backbench business debate about that last week, so we really do appreciate that. The Army Training Regiment in Winchester trains about 20% of new recruits, puts them through the basic training, and I was actually there last week at the passing out parade. It is scheduled to close next summer in 2026, and the replacement facilities in Perborough are not due to open until 2030 at the earliest, although we've heard that's going to be delayed. Will the Prime Minister review this decision? Because a 4-year gap between one facility closing and another opening, when we're rightly trying to increase troop numbers, doesn't really make sense to anyone.
Can I thank him for raising that issue? And I haven't got the details to hand, but what I will do is make sure that in written form I get him a full answer in relation to the points he's raising.
Sammy Wilson.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I know that many of the Ukrainian refugees in my constituency have welcomed the continuity between the previous government and the current government and its support for Ukraine. President Zelensky is under great pressure at the moment from some within the American administration to accept an unreasonable deal. And will the Prime Minister assure us that he will give his commitment to the President of Ukraine to ensure that he does not have to give in to the unreasonable demands of land surrender, of restricting the ability to defend itself in future, and also Russia not paying for the crimes which they've committed in Ukraine? It's important for Ukraine, but it's also important to send that message out to Russia that we will not reward the aggressor.
Well, I agree with him, and I give him that reassurance, and that's why we're working as closely as we are with the Ukrainians, particularly the President, but at all levels.
Vicky Slade.
Deputy Speaker, can I refer the House Register of Interest as a host of a Ukrainian? Given the growing instability around the world, the absence of the US President at G20 and COP30, How will the Prime Minister use the close relationship between the UK and America to ensure that Trump doesn't undermine the ability of global partnerships and agencies to keep us all safe from all types of problems ahead?
Well, I'm grateful to her, and it's very important that we make the case for multilateral work across the globe, whether that's G20 or COP30, and we will constantly make that case, because it's very important for a rules-based system across the world, of which the UN is one, and the principles of war are another, but it is also in our own interest as the United Kingdom.
Jim Allister.
The Prime Minister has told the House today that he and the United Kingdom will never falter in support of Ukraine. Does that mean that the United Kingdom is not part of the pressure on Ukraine to concede territory already occupied? And how could the ceding of territory be other than the rewarding of terrorism, the rewarding of aggression, and the whetting of the appetite of the aggressor?
Well, the approach we've taken is based on the principles I've set out to the House, and is absolutely rooted in what the Ukrainians want out of this, and that is why we are speaking and working so extensively with them in relation to these negotiations. But all matters about the future of Ukraine have to be for Ukraine, and that is the guiding principle in everything I've been doing.
Monica Harding.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I was pleased to see Sudan was included in the G20 consensus. Could the Prime Minister lay out what that will look like in practice, as it looks like the atrocities of El Fasher are likely to be repeated in Kordofan? What protections will be in place for the safe passage of civilians, humanitarian workers, the funding gap in assistance, and importantly, what conversations with or about states who are said to be funding the belligerents and keeping the war going, including the UAE?
Can I thank her for raising that and reassure her we're having extensive conversations with the Quad that are driving this forward on all fronts, but most immediately on the humanitarian situation, and we'll keep the House updated.
And the final question, Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I very much thank the Prime Minister for all that he does for the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, for the Western world. It is appreciated by many. There is a plan that we all hope can end the war in Ukraine, to stop the devastation and the killings. Eyes are focused on the plan, and I think of the innocents killed, the women and the children targeted, and the massacres by Russians. We think of it, children as young as 8, women as old as 80, raped by Russian monsters. The massacres in Bathboot, where over 200 people were found in a mass grave. There's more than that. If you look in video, you can see pictures of Russian soldiers torturing people, murdering people. I would suggest that when it comes to accountability, there must be, whatever peace will bring, it has to ensure that Russians who have carried out terrible crimes are made accountable. So can the Prime Minister confirm that there will be retribution? As a Christian, I know there will be retribution in the next world, but what I want to see is retribution in this world for them, and then eternal damnation for the rest of their lives.
Thank you for raising that, and it may be the last question, but it's a really important one, in terms of the atrocities and the impact that this has had on all Ukrainians. And I remember in the early days of the conflict seeing the images of civilians handcuffed and shot in the head, laying in the streets just outside Kyiv. It was shocking. I went to those communities when I was over there, and talked to the individuals, and it was their brothers, their sisters, their families, their colleagues who had had their hands tied and been shot in the head. And it fell to those individuals to pick the bodies up, to put them in shopping trolleys, wheel them to their church, and try to give them the best burial they could in the circumstances. And we should never lose sight of the human impact that these atrocities have, not only in relation to those individuals, but on all of us, myself included.
That concludes the statement, and I'll give the House a few moments for the front benches to settle.